About a month ago, Danny Baker was fired from the BBC Radio 5 Live over a racist royal baby monkey tweet, where Baker accused the BBC bosses of throwing him under the bus. The tweet was of Danny Baker saying the royal baby leaving the hospital with the picture of a chimp in a suit and two people acting as the proud parents. Don't get me wrong, I understand how this can be interpreted as racist, but I can assure you that was not Danny Baker's intention, as he has been working at the BBC as a presenter for well over 3 decades, probably longer, and at no point has ever shown to be racist in any way imaginable, so why would he choose now to be? But Danny had this to say about his firing. The call to fire me from BBC 5 Live was a masterclass of pompous faux gravity, he posted. Took a tone that said I actually meant that ridiculous tweet and the BBC must uphold blah blah blah. Literally threw me under the bus. Could hear the suit knees knocking. F him. He later told LBC that he understood entirely why he was sacked, but was upset over the way it was handled. He said he was given a lecture, which I terminated after about 30 seconds with a couple of words I'll leave you to fill in. So obviously he's not happy, and obviously the BBC had a direct line to fire him because of a, let's say, off-colour joke that some might find offensive. Okay? The BBC licence needs to be repealed because a joke is a joke, and of course, freedom of speech means freedom of speech and freedom to offend. If in later stages he becomes unpopular and makes the BBC lose viewers and money and things like that, then maybe you have a better reason to fire him. But just because he made a joke that he didn't even mean to be racially insensitive about, and then you go off and imply that he was being racially insensitive on purpose, yeah, you've crossed the line there about freedom of speech that I do not like, and sets a precedent that will set you on a course for mass censorship. So we've gone from one joke that can seem off-colour and offensive, and now we have Joe Brand this week saying this directly on the BBC. Take a listen.
Would you not say, Joe, we are absolutely united in feeling we are living through a terrible time from a parliamentary point of view?
Well, yes, I would say that, but I think that's because certain unpleasant characters are being thrown to the fore, and they're very, very easy to hate. And I'm kind of thinking, why bother with a milkshake when you could get some battery acid? That's just me, and it's all right. I'm not going to do it. It's purely a fantasy, but I think milkshakes are pathetic. I honestly do. Sorry.
It's just a fantasy. I think milkshakes are pathetic, so you should throw battery acid. Now, I understand that this is a joke on a BBC comedy show, but some people may find that offensive. And not only that, if you want to be as uncharitable as you were to Mr. Danny Baker, it could also be said to be incitement to violence. I want to make clear that I am not saying it is, it's just that if you want to be uncharitable with your interpretation, you could argue that it is. But of course the BBC was never going to do that on one of its own shows, especially for someone who is as left-wing as Joe Brand. BBC defends Joe Brand over battery acid joke. The BBC has defended Joe Brand against claims she invited violence through comments made during a radio show. The comedian, a guest on BBC4's Heresy on Tuesday, jokes about throwing battery acid at unpleasant characters rather than milkshakes. Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage, who was hit by a milkshake last month, said the police need to act. The BBC said the joke made on Heresy are deliberately provocative, as the title implies. It added, they are not intended to be taken seriously. Now, Nigel Farage, it's a joke, and you are usually a person for free speech, but maybe not recently. The police do not need to act about a joke made on a comedy programme, as the police do not need to act on Sargon of Akkad because he made a joke about the media pushing him to apologise for not raping Jess Phillips. No one needs to act on a joke. If anyone actually goes out of their way to throw battery acid on a politician because Joe Brand joked about it, it is entirely on that person, not Joe Brand making the joke. Get your head out your arse. The comic then went on to immediately make clear she was joking and criticised the milkshake stunts. That's just me. I'm not going to do it, she said. It's purely a fantasy, but I think milkshakes are pathetic, I honestly do. Sorry. Her follow-up comments were edited out of widely shared clips on social media. It's funny. It really is funny how the BBC are really trying to make certain that there is a wider context to these jokes. It's so funny how out of the way they're going to make sure that they realise the context of this joke, to make sure they understand that Jo Brand was joking and that she clarified she wouldn't actually do it. But when it comes to Carl, when it comes to anyone else on the right, on the internet, on YouTube, who makes a joke, who does a Nazi pug salute, they don't go out their way. They don't even try and make context. And now they have the audacity to make it out like it's only people sharing these that take out the context. Because that's what they're doing. That's what they're implying. Like, this is what the BBC do. They only make context for their guys and then try and make it look as bad as possible for anyone else. And it's really annoyed me. Oh, God, I can't believe they've done that. But another point I want to make out is that she said that it's a fantasy. Now, usually when people say it's a fantasy, it means something that they would love to do. You see, when I say I want to throw commies out of helicopters, I'm actually joking. I don't want to do that, and I would also never do that. I would never describe that as a fantasy, yet Jo Brand does. So I would point her out as being a bad person in this case. But Nigel wasn't the only politician asking about why Jo Brand said what she said. Theresa May asks BBC to explain Jo Brand broadcast. Prime Minister Theresa May has said the BBC should explain why a Jo Brand joke about throwing battery acid was appropriate content for broadcast. Well, I'll tell you why, Theresa. It's because we're in a country where free speech is supposed to be protected. So basically, any content that doesn't incite any criminal activity or slander people is perfectly fine by the books on the principle of freedom of speech. So if you don't want it to be appropriate and you want it to be banned, that makes you a tyrant. But luckily I already knew that since under your rule, Count Dankula has been forced to pay £800 to the government. So thanks for that. But to summarise so far, Jo Brand has basically made an edgy joke that, didn't land with some audiences particularly well. I didn't think it was particularly funny. I know a lot of people that didn't think it was particularly funny. I'm glad that she isn't being banned. I'm ironically quite glad in some way that the BBC is trying to defend her, but I am really, really mad that the BBC is only trying to defend Jo Brand and not trying to defend people like Danny Baker, because his joke hit the wrong target. We all know that's why. We all know that the BBC is incredibly left-wing in its bias. I mean, all you have to do is look at any panel show. I mean, for God's sake, in the past month I've seen Ash Sarkar on Politics Live 3 times. Literally a communist has been on 3 times, and no one bats an eye, no one cares. If you look at any single one of the question time panels, it will always be majority Remainers on the panel, despite the fact that most of the country voted leave and we are currently in the middle of a dispute about trying to get Brexit actually done. And it just happens to be that the person who is constantly on Have I Got News For You and other panel shows towing the correct lines, who gets defended by the BBC despite making an obviously offensive joke. So as much as I would love her to be held to the same standards as everyone else, I'm afraid I can't support it without being a hypocrite, and so I won't support it. Although I'll be honest, if she is held to the same standard, I really hope it changes something. But obviously she isn't, so I'm wishing for a goddamn unicorn at this point. But I do want to finish off by saying I actually rather like how Jo Brand has dealt with the dirty, dirty smear merchants. Take a look.
Jo, do you think you crossed the line with your comments this morning? How important is
Where are you from?
Sky News.
Jo, how important is freedom of speech in comedy? Yeah, freedom of speech in comedy, Jo. How important is it?
Sorry to do this.
That's quite all right. I'm quite enjoying that.
Joe, just a quick one. How important is freedom of speech?
How important is freedom of speech in comedy?
I think it's extremely important.
Sure, sure.
God, I do hate the dirty smear merchants. They just won't leave her alone. She hears her from Sky News and basically, in a really polite way, ignores them and basically tells them to piss off. Although she does say that freedom of speech is incredibly important, which, if she actually genuinely shows and lives by in principle, then all I can do is commend her on that. We need to win this one battle at a time. If we win the argument of free speech, which we already are, then we can use it to argue for further positions. But that's everything I had for you for today. So, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.